Slave Revolts in the Early 1800s, a flipped classroom video by Colleen Whitcomb. Even though the slave revolts were not successful, the slave rebellions of the early 1800s did shape early America because they kept the hope of freedom alive in slaves, planted the idea of abolition in the heads of government officials, and demonstrated the discontent that slavery caused. In the 1800s, slaves were forced into physical labor and harmed if they did not perform well. They were not allowed to receive an education and also not allowed to have gatherings, religious or other, without a white person present. Slaves were also treated as animals and sold as property. Because of this, slaves were very angry. Slaves found many ways to rebel against their owners to show their discontent with what was going on. Some of these rebellions included finding every possible way to ease the labor by working just slow enough to avoid being whipped or punished. They also stole food and other goods from the plantations and intentionally damaged equipment so that they could stop working until it was repaired. As the conditions of slavery got worse, the slave revolts got bigger. Examples of the larger-scale revolts are Gabriel's Rebellion, the Vesey Rebellion, and Nat Turner's Rebellion. Now we will go into more detail of each of those rebellions. Gabriel's Rebellion. Gabriel, the leader of the rebellion, was a slave blacksmith in the state of Virginia. He organized an armed revolt in which he and his followers would raid and steal the munitions from the state of Virginia, and they would then use them to fight the slave owners. Unfortunately, the revolt never occurred because it was discovered before it took place. Even though the event did not happen, the leaders were hung. Although this rebellion did not take place, the plans kept the flame of hope for freedom burning in the slaves. The Vesey Rebellion. Denmark Vesey was the leader of this rebellion. He was a free black man in Charleston, South Carolina, who was previously a carpenter as a slave. He bought his freedom and became a leader in the black church, where he studied the Bible. This revolt was an attempt to prove that slavery was against the teachings of the Bible. This revolt, too, was spoiled by snitches and did not happen, just as the Gabriel Revolt. Vesey and more than 30 of his accomplices were hung as punishment for planning this revolt. Just like the Gabriel Rebellion, the planning of this revolt demonstrated to other slaves that they could do something about their discontent with slave owners. Nat Turner's Rebellion. Nat Turner was the leader of this rebellion. He was a slave in Southampton, Virginia, who saw visions that led him to believe that God was leading the slaves to freedom just like he did with the chosen people. In August 1831, Turner met with 5 of his followers, and they went around killing every white person they saw in Virginia for 12 hours. By the end, when the militia was finally able to stop them, around 80 other slaves had joined them, and 60 white people lay dead. As a result, many blacks, both innocent and guilty, were executed for the crimes, and Virginia debated slowly abolishing slavery over time because it was a threat to public order, but instead they tightened the slave codes of Virginia. Even though slavery was not abolished at this time, Nat Turner's rebellion caused the government to think of the idea that would change our country later in history.